that in some water or some milk, let it set overnight, and about 2 or 3 days, this little thing is prepared to see with about this tall and killed. As long as you get it over, what's going to happen? It's over all the way to the cross. You're going to get it. All right? It's a miracle. How can you see? Well, God said that the same thing to us. Don't underestimate the power of the seed. You know, God did. When his king was ravaged, his people had forgotten his name. He planted his seed in the body of a young virgin. Before long. From this young virgin, where God has planted his seed, we have Christ coming to the world. Someone that they will do all kinds of things to our life. See a miracle? Watch God as he moves in power. It says, like a tender green shoot, sprouting from root to branch till rain. The seed spent lifetime pushing back. The seed made a ministry out of shoving away the rocks that flooded his father's soil. You know, stones of legalism, John chapter 9. Christ made God blind men to see. And the Jews said, we can't see what's taking place. And the blind men said, hey, look, I can't see. I can see the Son of God. What about you guys? But see, God, Christ, worked a miracle in their life. The stones of prejudice that fenced out the need. He goes and talks to the Samaritan woman. The disciples said, what are you doing? No, you can't do that. He said, yes, I can. And remember when Christ gets marching towards him, he says, take the gospel where? Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. Christ had planted the seed, and that seed, and that woman, you see, in the middle of water there. You weren't supposed to talk to her. I said, no, I can talk to her. Okay? But the final stone that proved to be the supreme test of the seed, the Son of Jesus. And they placed Christ in the Trinity. Christ had a gold stone cross. Christ said, I'm coming for us. You think about it, believe it? Oh, it is. Think about it. On 3 days later, Sunday, Mary and other Mary come to the tomb to anoint the dead body of Christ, right? They get there, the stones roll out. That
have this one on either. I forgot to turn it on. That's what's the problem. Everybody, hey, excuse me. I forgot to announce that Matt's class will meet in the auditorium. Since he's not here, Matt's class will meet in the auditorium.
Testing. That'll teach you to tell me to move it. Well, I might move it down just a little bit. All right, today, or this evening, we're going to begin a new lesson. This is Wherever You Go, I Will Go. This is Grace in the book of Ruth. We're following some of the lessons that have been provided by Heritage. These are online. If you would like to go on there, all you have to do, I think, is look up Grace Berea, I think is what it is. Berea, like the Berea back there. Berea series. They've got all of them in there. But tonight we're looking at Ruth, and the focus passage here is those verses that we all know and we've heard before. This is Ruth chapter 1, 16 and 17. It says, and Ruth said, now she's talking to Naomi, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest I will go, and whither thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. Now we know the story of Ruth. It's one that is endearing to all of us. We are very thankful for something of this particular nature to be put into the Bible. That it tells us the story of a woman and her daughter-in-law that have found a relationship that can get them through their lives. The beginning of this, we see Naomi, and Naomi is a woman who married a man named Abimelech, and they found famine in the Holy Land, and they were next to not Jerusalem, but Bethlehem. That's where they came from. And therefore, to escape the famine, they went to Boaz. And what happened here is that they strike a lot of bad luck, or Naomi does. The others are there. But what we find is it's divided into 4 different sections, according to our author here. And he says there's famine, death, and return. This is in chapter 1. The famine was in Bethlehem or thereabouts. And we know that Naomi and her husband left to go where there was food. And I mean, that's understandable. Well, while they were there, they had 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and those particular boys grew up and they married. And the ones they married were Ruth and Oprah. And so it went, as they went on, that in this first section, the husband dies, Naomi's husband dies, her 2 sons also die. And so she is left here in this strange country, and I don't know how strange it was. I think they had been there around 10 years after they left Bethlehem. And so she and the 2 daughters-in-law are now here to make it on their own. The problem is in the early times of the Bible, and I guess going right on through the New Testament, when a woman was left on her own, if her husband happened to die, then she was left to the generosity of the kinsmen that were round about her. She didn't have any way to do much of anything. Many times women could not own property. They could not run businesses. And of course, that makes it very hard on someone. So after the death of her husband and her 2 sons, she decides that she's going to go back to her homeland. And then that gets into part 2. What we find is Ruth, as she starts leaving Moab and gets on the road out there, these 2 girls go with her, I think, just about as far as they can without going over across the boundary line into Israel. And she tells them, she says, you're Moabites, and you can stay here. You can stay with your families, which you married into mine. You can go back. And of course, one of the daughters-in-law says she will go back, and she does. And we find that Ruth makes the statement that we read here in Ruth chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. She says, I'm not going to leave you, I'm going to stay with you. And it was probably out of great respect and love for her mother-in-law, because she had been raised with the sons-in-laws in their family for some time, and she just didn't want to leave Naomi just high and dry. It might have been hard for Naomi to make it on her own. I don't know how old she was, but Ruth decided that no matter how old she was or what kind of situation she was in, I'm going to stay with her, and I'm going to help her in any way that I can. So Naomi and Ruth return to Bethlehem to settle down. Now, when they get to Bethlehem, they find kinsmen, or they find people that Naomi knew was a kinsman. She'd only been gone, I don't know how long she'd been gone. It said something about her being there 10 years. But the idea is, when she got back to Bethlehem, she knew a lot of people there. I mean, she hadn't been gone long enough so that everybody died off, so she knew some people there, and she knew some kinsmen to her husband. and possibly even to herself. But the idea is, in these early days, you were not allowed to sell your land, and I guess that probably went right straight through the New Testament as well. If you were a Jew and you had a portion of land that had been given to you when it was divided way back when, and you were instructed not to sell that, you could not sell it. Now, you could, I guess you might say, rent it. If you were hard up on luck and you just could not make it, then you could rent that land to whomever, and it would stay theirs until the Jubilee. The Jubilee was a time when all possessions went back to their rightful owner, I guess you'd say. So that's what's happened here. Naomi and her husband were the recipients of land, and they had this land. The problem was, as I said, there was a famine and there was just nothing to eat. They had to do something. So it would seem that they sold this land to someone and headed out for Moab, which may have been the smartest thing to do, I don't know. But the idea is that they did not totally relinquish ownership of the land. The land was still theirs, but it had been rented out until the time of Jubilee, when everybody's land went back to the original owner. If you sold yourself into slavery because of debt or whatever, then you got out of slavery when the Jubilee came. Now, that's how they figured out how much to pay. The Jubilee came around every 70 years, I think it was. And so let's suppose that it were 5 years to the Jubilee, then they would pay you for 5 years of being a slave. Or they would buy your land for 5 years. Now, that means they're not going to give you what it's worth, because they're only going to have possession of it for 5 years. And that, of course, is what's happening here with Naomi. She comes back, and if she wants to claim this land, if she wants to get it back immediately, then she's going to have to pay for her land the rent or whatever they have decided on up until the time of the Jubilee. And she can't do that. She doesn't have the money to do that. She doesn't have any way to get the money to do that. So that second part of Ruth is the plan that, it's Ruth's plan to glean in the fields of Boaz. This starts in chapter 2. Ruth decides that she's going to go and glean. Now what that was, everyone that had fields to harvest, they had to leave the corners of the fields for the poor folks. And if you didn't have any way of making a living, or you were just hard on your luck, then you could go out there and gather grain as long as it was there from these people. And they realized that's what God said, and they allowed that. Well, Ruth knew that was pretty much going to be their only way of getting the food. So she chooses to go to Boaz's field. Now, Naomi has already understood that Boaz is a near kinsman, that he's a very wealthy man. He has, the funds to buy back the land and even marry Ruth if he decides to, and she doesn't have a kinsman closer than him. So Ruth's plan was, I'm going to go glean. That's how I'm going to get some food. Well, Naomi's plan was to get Ruth to meet Boaz. She wants Ruth to marry Boaz, and Boaz, of course, is just going about his business. He does, as Ruth is gleaning in the field, he does recognize her. Now, what I mean recognize, he sees there's a new woman out there, and this is Ruth, and she is gleaning, and he hears then, he asks one of his I guess you'd say overseers or whatever, who is this woman, and he tells him that she is the daughter-in-law of Naomi, and so he instructs the men that are there to leave grain for Ruth to get. She's not going to have to do as much work as the rest of them, I guess, because they're taking these bundles of grain and just laying them where she's going to come by and pick them up. So now that's Ruth meeting Boaz. That's what Naomi wanted to happen. And then at the end in chapter 4, we see Boaz's plan. Boaz wants to marry Ruth. And again, there's a lot of history in this between the first and the second. But that's the 4 sections you could divide the book into. Now, when we notice what's happening, we know that they have, that Naomi and Ruth have concocted a plan for them to get close enough to Boaz to get him to marry Ruth. And what Naomi is doing here is putting Ruth in a situation where Boaz is more apt to ask her to marry him. Now, in some of my research, I found that there are people that believe that Boaz was 80 and Ruth was 40. That they did get married and had this one child, and then Boaz dies. Now, that's just purely off somebody's head. There's nothing in the reading here that tells us the age of either of these people. But the idea is, Boaz, having seen Ruth, wanted to know more about her, was determined to get some information about her, because evidently she was a good-looking woman, and he was rich enough to have, I guess, as many wives as he wanted. But we notice that Ruth and Naomi are going to get a plan here where Boaz is going to know that they are in favor of him marrying her, that that they welcome this. Well, if we go deeper, we notice that it says here, investigation into the portrayal of grace in the book of Ruth can begin by considering one of the book's prominent themes, and that's emptiness to fullness. And that's what we see with Naomi and Ruth. They come out of the emptiness that they have in Moab, and they come into fullness by associating themselves with Boaz and his people. Now, of course, the beginning of the story just has Ruth going there, and approaching. But Naomi's life becomes increasingly characterized by emptiness. She's got a husband, she's got 2 sons, she's got 2 daughters-in-law, and they seem to be making it fine. Now, how her men folk died, I don't know. But there has been suggested by some that they left their homeland and went into a pagan land, into Moab. Now, I don't think that there's anything here that shows that they had taken up the way of the Moabites, that they were worshiping their gods or any such thing. But there are some that seem to think that these 3 men were struck down because they did come into Moab and were putting their families in jeopardy of becoming, idol worshipers and all of that. How they died, I'm not sure. It just says that they died. Now that means that Naomi, as I said, is left alone, and she comes back home, and we know that she meets some of the women that are there, and she knows them. They're people that may even be kin to her. But when she returns, she finds out that they're talking to her, and evidently they call her Naomi. And she says here, this is in Ruth chapter 1, 20 and 21, she says, "Do not call me Naomi." Now literally that means pleasant. She replied, "Call me Mara," which literally is bitter. For Shaddai, and this is the Hebrew word for Almighty, so she's talking about God, has made my lot very bitter. I went away full, and Yahweh has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi when Yahweh has dealt harshly with me when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me. Now, she uses two different words for God here, and I'm not exactly sure why she would do that, but that's just what she did. Now, it says, even though Naomi was, in fact, in threat of starving from a famine in Bethlehem, she depicts the time of her life as full and pleasant in comparison to the empty and bitter life that she now faces with the loss of her husband and two boys. So there, again, she's a woman. Now, she is back in her homeland, so there's probably going to be some help there for her. But she says she doesn't want to be called Naomi. She wants to be called Mara because she has lost everything, or at least she thought she had. Well, after the stark depiction of her loss, she has three subsequent scenes in going through this. And it says that Naomi's steady and emptiness became fullness by repeatedly using a single Hebrew root word, and it's goel, often transferred redeem or kinsman. She figures out a plan. Now, again, as she has been introduced to Boaz and has come to know who he is, in her estimation, the closest member of Elimelech's family that can now choose to take Ruth for his wife. Well, I'm sure that she searches for, the backup of this. This exactly was a near kinsman, and he was. Now, he could serve as the redeemer for Ruth and Naomi if there were not someone closer than him in the family line. So they tell him what they want to do. And of course, that's leaving out a whole lot of things because they get a plan that what Naomi wants Ruth to do in order to get get the marriage to Boaz. Let's see. Well, I guess the best thing to do is just explain it. It was time of threshing. It was time of threshing the wheat that they had, and all the men were there threshing wheat. It would seem that during the time of threshing wheat that the men actually stayed at the threshing floor. They were there. You know, it wasn't any sense in going home every night and come back the next morning because you're going to do exactly the same thing over and over and over again. So it would seem that the men were there. They were sleeping there. Now, this especially happened on the last day of threshing. It became a big party. When they got through threshing the grain, everybody was glad that it was threshed, and they started to have reveling. They had, of course, something to drink. They had women, and they just had a wild time. And so Boaz goes to the threshing floor and beds down for the night. Now, he is intoxicated. He's not going to have any trouble sleeping, I don't guess, but he beds down there. Now, Naomi has already told Ruth what you got to do. You have got to go in here and you have got to uncover his feet. And what you want to do is you want to uncover his feet. You want to lay close to his feet or on his feet and then cover yourself back up with his mantle, with his garb. Now, there's something else. This gets into a whole lot of different things about covering feet and all that, and I'll let you look that up because I really don't want to talk about it. But it happened. It was kind of a big thing. And so she does this. Well, he wakes up the next morning and here's a woman beside him. And of course, he recognizes who she is. And she explains herself that Naomi had sent me here. I'm Ruth, I'm a close kinsman, and I want to marry you. So now Boaz, I guess, who has, kind of come in from his stupor, now knows that things are going on. But now, since Ruth is younger, she, again, I think probably is a good-looking woman, he said, I will do that. I will marry you. But there's just one hitch. If there's someone closer, if there's a closer kinsman to you than me, they get first chance. So, if there was somebody closer, then that person would have the opportunity of marrying Ruth and all the things here that they have planned for Boaz to do. Now, Boaz was a very rich man. He had money. And so what happened was, he said, I will find out if there is any closer kinsman to you than me, and then we'll go from there. So she says, that's fine. So he calls a meeting at the gates of the city and Bethlehem. And so he takes 10 people with him, and then other people gather in. It seems that he must have been a pretty important man in the city, because he called this meeting of all the men of the city, or a great portion of them, and want to find out if there's a closer kinsman. Well, during the meeting, another man tells him that I am closer than you are. I'm a closer kinsman to Ruth than you are, or maybe to Naomi, but to the pair of women. Well, I think Boaz kind of now starts to say, okay, if you want to marry this girl, what you've got to know is that means another family is coming into your family. Naomi and Ruth is coming into your family. Also, you're going to have to buy back the land that Naomi and her husband sold to get to go over to Moab. There's still some time left in that particular bargain, whoever they made it with. Well, the other guy that's a near kinsman has to think about it a while, and he says, I can't afford to put anybody else in my family. I can't afford to buy that land. So I just simply cannot. I will have to just relinquish my near kinsmanship, and you can have it. Then he takes off his shoe and gives it to Boaz. Now this was a sign in that day and age that meant that I relinquish my part in all of this. Now he gives him the shoe back. It's not a big deal, but he gave him his shoe, and that let everybody there know that he is giving up his position as next kinsman. So that meant that Boaz had the go-ahead to marry Ruth, and of course he does that. He marries Ruth, he buys back the land, and then of course Naomi is going to get to be within his family as well. And then we find that they have a child together. And we know that this child, if you look back through the genealogies, you find that the son was Obed. And Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. So what we got, if you look in the genealogies of Christ, you'll find that this Moabite woman, Ruth, is now in the descendants of Jesus. Now that might seem a little unusual. He was supposed to come of the Jews, and of course he did. But when we find out that all of this transpires, that Jesse, of course, has David, and that means that Obed is David's grandfather, and I guess that means that Ruth is his great-grandmother. And I may have that off, but that's what happens. What the whole thing about Ruth is getting this thing of the line of Jesus to keep going. And that's what happened. We know that they left the Holy Land because of famine, and it's even suggested that that particular famine was put on Bethlehem and the area surrounding there because the people had been unwilling to follow God. They had turned against God. Now, the Bible tells us that God said that these Jews are going to prosper, and they're going to have good crops, they're going to have rain for their crops, and all of these things. as long as they stay faithful to God. Well, they hadn't. And all kinds of good things that they could have. This all comes from Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 13 through 17. And it says, "And if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, I love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. He will give you rain of your land in its season, the early rain and the latter rain, that you may gather your grain and your wine and your oil. And he will give grass in the fields to the livestock. You shall eat your full. Take care lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside to serve other gods and worship them. The anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, and the land will not yield its fruit, and you will perish quickly off the good land that the Lord is giving you." So when we look at the famine, I mean, you can pretty much put one and one together here. If they're having famine in the Holy Lands, then that means that they did not do what God instructed them to do here. They had turned away to other gods. And that's what I mentioned a moment ago, is that because Naomi's family, well, her husband, they went over there into Moab, that God destroyed the men because they were over there in a place that they shouldn't have been in. Again, there's no suggestion that they were actually following after these all kinds of other gods in Moab, but at least we see some insight into why they left Bethlehem as they did. God said, if you don't do it right, I'm going to take all these things away from you. So he did, and that's what has been suggested, that the men had passed away. It's a great story. You know, a lot of times we look at a lot of places for stories and love stories and that kind of stuff, but right here's a great one right there in the book of Ruth. Well, if we look at the application of this, it says, attention to the theme, emptiness to fullness, has already been discussed. It's opportunities to consider how acts of favor or grace are central to Naomi's unexpected reversal. She had a bad time in losing her husband and her sons in Moab, and she has to just, I guess, sit down and weigh her how she can do things, whether she's going to stay here in Moab with her two daughters-in-law, or she is going to go back to her land. And she decides I won't be any worse off, I guess, if I go back home. So she tries to convince her daughters-in-law that they don't need to go back with her. And of course, one says, I'm not going, I'm going back to my home. And the other, of course, Ruth said that she is going to go with Naomi, even to die, where she dies. So it's a very great thing. Even we use this particular thing, these particular verses in wedding ceremonies a lot. You know, where you go, I'll go, and where you die, I'll die. Your people will be my people. We use that in a lot of marriage ceremonies, even though the original was a woman to a woman. But the same sentiment could be, of course, something that a bride would say to her husband or husband's bride. But you know, the thing about this is there's very little, if any, direct reference to God. You know, as Naomi has said, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara, because my life is bitter. And she talks about Yahweh returning her empty to Bethlehem. And so she refers to God, but there's not really anything that comes right out and just says, okay, God did this or God did that. Says grace, this is on, well, I don't know what page it is. It's one that says application. It says grace manifested through fidelity and redemption and born out of a trust in God's ability to act appears in the book of Ruth within an interplay between divine guidance and human initiative. You know, God was guiding them. They were good Jews, I would suppose. But she also, Naomi had a plan. She knew the law. She knew what could be done, would be done, or should be done. And so she draws up this plan, as we saw there, in getting Ruth married to Boaz. It says the book does not contain miracles or direct speech from God, and primarily focuses on the interaction between the members of a single family. That is the family of Naomi. It says, however, the book is not devoid of theology. Two direct statements of God's activity brackets the beginning and ending of the story. God brings an end to the famine and thereby provides initial possibility for movement toward Naomi's redemption. I don't know if Naomi had heard when she was in Moab that the famine was letting up in her hometown or whatever. She just moved. She went to her hometown in order to receive some help, some kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, solace, whatever. And so she goes there. And when she gets there, she finds that there's an end to this famine. And there is the possibility of picking up the stalks of wheat in the corners of the field that would give them some kind of eating. And these things that she connived with Ruth brought forth this child. And I guess you might say that the child was just as much Naomi's as it was Ruth, because Naomi lost everybody that was in her family. So this was starting anew. And it says, we overcome only by trusting in God. These acts were of God, that He did these things for her, and she came out to be someone who was cared for during the famine and after the famine. It says the interactions between human characters rather than the action of God dominates the story. Central to understanding the nature of the grace exhibited by the characters are their numerous displays of hesed, H-E-S-E-D, Hebrew word meaning fidelity, kindness, loyalty, loving kindness, or steadfast love. There was a love between these two women that obviously contained God within it. They felt a very close kinship to one another. And they, of course, were traveling together and going to make the best of it together. And it would seem that God wanted to take care of these women, to rescue them from the situation that they were in. And therefore, He gets them back to Bethlehem. And when He gets them back there, then the story takes up from what they plan. Now, it does say that Naomi concocts a dangerous plan for the sole purpose of finding a home for Ruth. Ruth is recognized that she shows, and she leaves all she knows to follow Naomi to a foreign country. You got to remember that Ruth was a Moabite, that she was not of Israel, and maybe in any other circumstance she would not have been accepted as she was. But she has a Jewish mother-in-law who is taking care of her and recognizing the great person that she was, and they work to further the story. Again, I don't know if God had anything to do with every little bitty step of this, but Naomi knew what she was doing. She knew how to go about these things, and therefore she did. It says, before he, that is Boaz, I suppose, knows he is the redeemer for Naomi, Boaz shows concern and makes special allowances for Ruth as she gleans. As I said, they left gleanings all around the place for her to pick up. And the Bible in the book talks about how much grain she was able to gather and how much grain that she got the night that she stayed with Boaz. Said it was so heavy that she didn't think probably she could carry it. But Boaz sets it on her. He picks it up and sets it on her head. And she takes off to see Naomi with that. All right, we'll have to stop there, and we'll continue with this next week. And for those of you that are normally in this class, make sure you look at these 8 discussion questions because they're long and deep. This guy's good.